and welcome to Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is created to empower mental health awareness. And today I have my special guest, no other than Miss Constance Hastings.
Hello, Dan.
Welcome.
Great.
Welcome to. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, for having me today.
Welcome to Mental Health 101, Miss Constance. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
I was able to go back to school after a 25-year career in education and get my degree in counseling. And from that, I developed an 18-year practice in mental health, counseling people. Um, basically of all walks of life. So it was a journey that I was pleased to take with other people, but they also took me to places I never would have been without them.
Certainly. And people, Miss Constance is the author of the book, The Trouble with Jesus. So, what is mental health and why is it important, Miss Constance?
Mental health is, let's put it this way, it's the part of us that seeks to understand our life before us. And it's important to everybody. We have to have a way of explaining our life and knowing how to deal and cope with it. Something is going to happen in our lives that it's going to be distressing. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be even possibly traumatic. And we have to be prepared for that. Just as in life, where we need to have physical strength to be able to function, we need to have mental health as be able to function, both in understanding ourselves, our place in the world, and how we are able to interact in our relationships. So it's vital to who we are and how our lives are going to turn out.
Certainly. So, Miss Constance, how does mental health impact overall well being and daily life?
Mental health is centered, I believe, in, I don't mean to get too deep into philosophical realms, but in an existential way. That means that we have to have a way of explaining our lives and the world around us. That starts basically with the universe. How did we get here? Who are we? What are we meant to do? Where is this going? What's my purpose? And when someone is willing to enter into those deep questions, they begin to have a better sense of how they need to deal with their lives, whether it be the day-to-day functions of getting up and getting through your day, or whether it means big life choices. Where you're going to work, what you're going to do, how do you have a relationship, what's your process in raising your children, what do you believe in? And those answers to that question have to be confronted. You have to deal with them. Unfortunately, I believe in our culture we downplay that. Uh, Mental health, we when we talk about that and the illnesses that come from that, might not have on the surface the stigma that we believe or that we used to believe was very prevalent and had people resistant in getting help. But it's always the other person who has mental illness. The truth of the matter is, not a single one of us go through life without having some episode of mental illness that occurs to us. And I believe the statistics are that within the adult population, one third of the population at some time is having a mental health episode. That can be something from depression, it can be grief, it can be anxiety, or it can dissolve into more serious psychoses. So, in all of that, you have to be aware of it and be able to understand what it takes to keep yourself mentally healthy. We'll compare it to physical health. Back, the easy example here, because we've all been through it, but back when COVID was first starting, we learned the importance of washing our hands. And
Yes.
washing our hands, we realized, was a big defense in keeping us healthy and not spreading a disease. We need to find those same ways functionally in within our mental health that we can operate in and keep ourselves healthy and not negatively impact us or those around us.
Certainly, very well said, Miss Constance. Very well said. And what are the most common mental health disorders?
I would say grief is primary because we all have loss in our life, and we
Yes.
need to realize how to cope with loss and not deny it, not to pretend that it's not a problem. All you have to do is just live through it, and it's over and doesn't affect you anymore. That I would say is primary, but mostly neglected by our culture. Beyond that, we live in a culture that, as you know, is stressed. We live in a culture that's very divisive. We live in a culture in which there is such a grasping for control and power that people are being just shredded as far as their lives and what is going on. And in all that, uh, the combination of all that coming together is really hurting us. And so, as an individual living in this day and age, how do we best deal with that? Now, that's not to say, and that we're living in the worst time ever. I think back to say the beginnings of World War II. And a lot of people were very much living in fear. I compare that fear to the fear that we have today. It was not exactly the same situation, but we question what is going on in this world, just like we question that today. And we have to be able to realize that this is not unusual. That people live through it, they come through it, and sometimes if they handle it right, they're better people because of it. I think this is a small example, but just think about how many movies you've ever watched about World War II, and they're always coming through that trauma of war, but they come through. And yes, there is loss, and yes, there is grief, and yes, lives are turned upside down and changed and impacted by it, but there are heroes in it. And that's what a person who takes care of themselves and lives through it with good mental health practices becomes that hero. I believe that the counseling clients that I had during those 18 years are probably the most courageous people that I've ever will meet in my life because they were willing to walk that road and to examine their lives in such a way that they could continue and be the best people that they were created to be.
Certainly, Miss Constance. So, how do genetics and environment influence mental health?
Uh, that is a good consideration. In my own family, there are strains, let's put it that way, of mental illness, and we all have to become aware of that and know how to support people that we love when that comes about. So genetics are a part of that. In the same way, though, you just can't put it down as, oh, that's just the way I was and I can't help it. I particularly am proud of a certain young woman I know that grew up and she had issues of depression and she was anorexic and really, really struggled throughout her life. But when she entered into her 20s, because she'd had love, because she had support, because she had good doctors and medication, she came to a place where today she is thriving. She's thriving in her career. She's thriving as a wife and a mother. And I am so proud of her for that. So, it doesn't mean that we're going to be this way and our lives can't be any different and we can't have success. But it does mean that we have to be in a place where we have that support, where we have that intervention, where we're willing to do what needs to be done in order to be whom we were really meant to be.
Certainly, yes, indeed. So, what are the early signs of poor mental health?
Of course, it's going to depend upon the individual. But I personally am concerned when you see people who they may go into denial and just kind of start pulling back. Somebody who might be very anxious and needs to have strong control over every aspect of his or her life. Those kinds of things, they can be subtle, so we have to be aware of them. And like I said, all of us are going to go through periods like this. That doesn't mean that we're going to collapse and have to, go into treatment, and all the horror stories that you may have heard about mental health. But it does mean that it must be addressed, and it has to reach out for support. All of us have had a cold, and we can go to the drugstore and we can get some kind of a cold medicine that's going to get us through the next week, and we can come out of that. Sometimes that's what happens. But then sometimes people get colds, and no matter what they do, it just gets worse and can develop into bronchitis or pneumonia. And mental health can follow that same pattern. Um, Particularly when it comes to the psychoses, family members have to be aware and supportive, and tell somebody, yeah, I love you no matter what you're going through, no matter what is happening within your brain that is not coinciding with the reality that I see around you, and help them understand that even though this might be happening, you're still part of my world, and I want to keep you there.
Yes, definitely. So let's talk about mental health awareness and stigma. Why is there still stigma surrounding mental health issues, Miss Constance?
Fear,
Fear.
and it within the brain, we feel that whatever thoughts we have are are reality. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. Anxiety is a good example of that, where people begin to question what is going on around them. They question the people that are around them. They question what is going to happen to them. And the irrational thoughts can enter into that. Negative thinking can enter into that. So we need to be able to look at that negative thinking. And sometimes you may need to have a counselor come alongside you and say, okay, let's take a look at this thinking pattern that you have, and let's evaluate what is going on here and what we might need to do to adjust that. Yeah, in ourselves, we come to a point where we can't view those thoughts maybe in an objective way because there are thoughts. So they have to be adjusted. They have to be put up against what others say. And having a trusting relationship with a counselor is very key in doing that.
So, what are the consequences of ignoring mental health problems?
Family dysfunction, your work um, settings. If you have the wrong people in your work setting, it can be disastrous. And and then there's the. I think our society has a view that if someone is mentally ill, they're going to be violent. Actually, studies show that is there's a very low chance of that. But again, we do know that sometimes people do act out, and that can be very destructive in all relationships. All of this coming together to a society that is sitting in this tension and this stress and not dealing with it means that a lot of things that we depend on are not going to be able to, we can't necessarily trust. And so the impact is definitely huge.
So, Miss Constance, what are the some myths about mental health that need to be debunked?
That you can't recover. Okay. People can be severely depressed people can be, yeah, I mentioned before, like having something like anorexia. Some people can have different kinds of mental health issues, and to believe that you can't recover, that you can't come through them, it is a myth. That doesn't say that any of this is easy. That doesn't mean that we have to walk a path that is going to be, just pull yourself together, and it's going to be fine. And as you mentioned, I was working in a church, and there would be people who would say things like, "Well, if you had enough faith, you wouldn't feel that way." It's not a matter of faith. People can have immense amounts of faith, but because mental illness is, in a real sense, a biological imbalance, we're talking about a physical disease, and it needs the intervention that we would give to cancer, diabetes, heart issues in the same way. So that must also be corrected.
Yes, very well said, Miss Constance. Indeed, beautifully articulated. So, how do culture or how do different cultures perceive and address mental health?
That's a good question. Some cultures will deny it completely, seen as a weakness in that regard. And again, if you saw somebody with a broken leg, would you say to that person, well, this is something that's your fault and you need to just, get up and walk and you'll be better for it? Things
Doesn't.
don't work that way.
Yes.
Um, the other thing that is an issue is a resistance to taking medications. Now, I'm going to talk two sides of the story here. On one hand, good counseling, and especially if it's centered in cognitive therapy, is a very good way of addressing mental health, of helping people reverse those thought processes to be able to be in a healthy place. However, as I said before, we're talking about a biological imbalance. I would never say to someone who has high blood pressure, you don't need to take your medication, or someone who is diabetic, don't take your insulin. There is something within the body that is in balance that needs to be adjusted. And thank God we've got medications that can do that and can help people in that regard. Is that administration of medication for mental health issues perfect? Not yet. Sometimes people have described it to me as, well, I've taken this and I've taken that, and it just seems like it's a crapshoot as to what's really going to help me. That is true to some regard. However, we do have now a way of being able to analyze where the imbalance is in the brain and how to address it and what medications are best for that through the use of brain scans. I have seen brain scans of someone who is in deep distress because of mental illness, and after proper treatments, and I'm talking here both counseling and medications, the brain began to heal. And that to me is miraculous. Unfortunately, it's not a common treatment, and it is very expensive, and you need someone who is highly trained to be able to do that. But you know what? If it's someone I love, I turn over heaven and earth to find it. If someone really, was in need of that, and yet that's not to deny that it is good to have a psychiatrist that you can talk to and that can help prescribe and test out which of these medications are best. Now, having found that medication, it's important to stay on that medication. In that way, I've I've seen people who are doing really, really well, and then they say, "Well, I don't need this anymore," and they go off of it, and next thing you know, you're back at square one. So stay on your medication. Again, you wouldn't tell a diabetic you don't need any more insulin, and it's the same way in mental health.
Yes, people, if you need help, please do ask for help. So, Miss Constance, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Book 101 Review in its fifth season. People, fifth season. And please do listen to my feature author of the month, Miss Angela Henry, award winning and best selling author. So, please do listen, Book 101 Review, wherever you listen your podcast. So, what are the some effective ways to support a friend or family member struggling with mental health issues?
In all relationships, you need someone that's going to listen to you and be willing to do that. That doesn't mean that you fix the problem, but you be willing to listen to them and encourage him or her to get help, professional help through counseling and psychiatric care. Now, that's a huge step, yes, and it has to be suggested in a delicate way. However, even within my own family, there comes a time when people begin to say, maybe we ought to give this a try. And as I said with that young woman that I know, because she had love and support and good care from her family, she was able to come through some real trauma, and she's now living her life the best life that she could possibly have. She has to stay in treatment. She has to keep her medications up. She recognizes that, but she's better for it.
Yes. So, Miss Constance Hastings, thank you so much for your knowledge and thank you so much for empowering us. So, can you please invite our listeners to support the Trouble with Jesus?
Yes, you can find it. Just ask for it wherever you love to buy books. I really suggest, though, you look at your local bookstore in order to do that. And you can find me on my blog at constancehastings.com.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Constance Hastings because if you support her, more and more empowering books to come, more and more empowering knowledge to come. So, Miss Constance, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Bodycom people, see you soon.